Richard Riley, great photographer. I've stolen some of these. I hope he'll forgive me at some point. But the hills west of Trilby are a beautiful sight, and it brings a lot of people there even today. And as you come into Trilby, there's not much left anymore, and not too many people left that remember either. And so that's been the task that I have taken on. And of course, this is what we think of now as the community of Trilby. This is the central hub of Trilby, the post office, what had been the United Methodist Church. There was a grocery store, a couple of grocery stores right there. The Home Demonstration Club, what we've called the Trilby House through the years. The post office, of course, is the hub of activity for the community even now, and it was a great place to go when I was growing up. Of course, we have the Withlacoochee State Trail there in Trilby now, which is a great resource. It would have been neat to have had it when I was growing up, but if we'd had this when I was growing up, guess what we would not have had? The railroad. But I thought this was a great thing to come along and take the place of the railroad, the State Trail. And here's the slide that I kind of like. This is looking south on the State Trail, and that's what it replaced. So it's just coincidence it worked out that way, but I thought that's pretty neat. So we're going to take this trail backward tonight, and this is the original, not the original depot, but this was the depot that was built by the Atlantic Coastline. The building on the left is the freight depot. The one on the right was the passenger depot, and the one on the right is really more of a shed. You really can't tell from this angle, but it's really a huge shed with a couple of buildings on the end of it. This was the original depot at Trilby. A few years ago, the county placed a historical marker there at Trilby, and tells a little bit of the story from the earliest start when the settlers first came. And I want to talk a little bit about where everyone came from. But the first post office, this is a more recent discovery, and Jeff Miller and I have had some conversations about this. It was actually called Pinan, and it was 1880 to 1881. P-I-N-A-N, Pinan. But the post office was only there for about a year, and William McLeod was the one and only postmaster there. Well, a few years later, in 1885, the first post office that we thought was the first post office was established, called McLeod, for that same family, William McLeod's family. And they were some of the earliest settlers. But it did not remain McLeod for long. Just later that year, later that month, it was renamed Macon. And so that was the name of the community, was Macon, until 1901, when it officially became known as Trilby. But it had actually been called Trilby, but it just took the post office that long to rename it Trilby. It didn't take them long to rename it Macon from McLeod, but to go from Macon to Trilby took a little bit longer. Of course, you know, Brooksville was an antebellum town. Brooksville had been around for a long time, but the area around Trilby had not been settled too much, very sparsely settled. But people began to come to this area. Some of them had fought in the Second Seminole War, lived in South Georgia. I thought, did they like what they saw? Is that what brought them back? But it was probably the Homestead Act. That's what brought most of the people here. They could get some land through the Homestead Act. So they settled close to the Withlacoochee River, and that's how the settlement was started. And one of the families that came was the Croft family. They came to Trilby along with several other families from what was then called New River County, the area around Lake Butler and Stark up in North Florida. But they had only lived there for maybe 10 years or so. They had actually been in South Georgia, Colquitt, Quitman. They had all lived in that area. The Croft family, the McLeod family, and they had all come down, the Blitch family, and they all came to the area that became Trilby about the same time. This picture is of the Swift Creek Cemetery out from Lake Butler, and these are the Croft matriarchs, and several of their children came here. And we know of a lot of Crofts here in the area. There are the Crofts that live out in the Darby area. There are the Crofts that live in Dade City, the Crofts that live out in Trilby, and they were all related. They all came together from this area near Lake Butler, up in what's now Union County, was then New River County, Bradford County. And there's an area to the west of Trilby, out in a cow pasture, where this is a cemetery here, out in a cow pasture just a little west of Trilby, in what's now the Evans property. And some of the Blitches are buried there that came during that time. There's Pages and Parishes, and there's also a family, I'll get to that here in a second. This is Queen Croft. She married Thomas Blitch. And she is actually buried in that cemetery. She died, there haven't been any active burials since about 1901, I believe, early 1900s. And so this picture of her was a particular find. And she's buried out there in that cow pasture cemetery that I showed you earlier. Her grave is on the right here. Her husband, Thomas Page, on the left. And it's an interesting cemetery to visit. And Judy Jolly and I have had some conversations about the cemetery. In fact, I owe her a trip out there. There was a Baptist church there, and this was called Hebron. This little area was Hebron Baptist Church, and it's called the Hebron Cemetery. And there was N.A. Williams, who was a doctor or a pharmacist, or he came from Arkansas to this area. So what brought him from Arkansas to what would become known as Trilby? A baby of his that is buried in that cemetery, and this stone is on the ground. It often gets covered up by the grass and a thin layer of soil. I often have to find it again when I'm out there, but just interesting. Then we had some people that came from Marengo County, Alabama. These would be the Ravesees, and some of you may recognize some of these names, the Ravesees, the Cochrans, and the McCraes. They came down from Marengo County, Alabama. Very interesting, Marengo County had a lot of French people there that had been refugees during the Napoleon years. And they set up what they called the Vine and Olive Colony. And it's been romanticized through the years. They talked about these people in their evening gowns out trying to till the soil, you know, the ladies, but it was romanticized. I've heard through the years it really wasn't quite like that. But these people lived there in Marengo County, and there was a settlement there called Macon. And I'm wondering if maybe that's where we got the name for Macon, Florida. What became Trilby was maybe these settlers, the McCraes, the Ravesees, the Cochrans that came down from Marengo County, Alabama. And this is one of the McCraes, and he was even in the state legislature. And very interesting. So our first legislator from Trilby was not Wilton Simpson, but it was Representative McCrae here. And I did get that picture from the state, the legislative, they have like a historical society there in the state capitol. These are some of the people, some of the early people. These are McCraes and McLeods in this picture here, and also some Trunnells. But I thought this was an interesting picture of some of the early residents of Trilby. We don't see too many people in Trilby dressed like this these days. And then we had the Michlers and the O'Berrys that came down from North Carolina. And very interesting here, they set up a school, and this is a school picture here. And they gave the name of the school there at Trilby, the name of a school that they were familiar with up in North Carolina. They called it Wake Forest Academy. And then we had the Bankstons that came down from Delhi, Louisiana. We'd say Delhi, but they say Delhi there. And also western Mississippi. And this was their house, and this was up on the hill across from where I grew up. And you can tell that they came, just looking at the architecture of this house tells you a little something, at least it's interesting to me. Double front doors. They came from Louisiana, western Mississippi, kind of a little bit of that plantation style architecture that they brought along with them. And this house burned a few years ago, but a very interesting house. Now I have a story here to tell you about a family that came down from New River County, the Bradham family. And the Bradhams had been in South Carolina prior to going to New River County and before coming to Trilby. And Henry Bradham was the father, and he went off to fight for the Confederacy, and he died in a military hospital in Knoxville, Tennessee. And I've been to Knoxville, I've tried to find his grave, and he's apparently in an unmarked grave. This is a monument that was erected there for the soldiers. It's in a cemetery there in Knoxville for the Confederate soldiers that are buried there, and there are a lot of unidentified burials. And I'm guessing that he is somewhere in this vicinity. But after he died, he didn't know his youngest child, and the widow and the children eventually came to Trilby, or what was then with the McLeod family and the Blitch family and the Croft family. And this is a picture that was recently discovered by one of the Bradham granddaughters, and she passed it along to me, and I was very pleased to get this picture, and we were able to identify the people. The lady standing on the left, her name was Rose Bradham, and she married a Union soldier, a much older man who was teaching school at the Hebron School out west of Trilby. And so I wrote a little story about her a few years ago. I haven't distributed it around, but I entitled it Confederate Orphan Yankee Widow. And as her father died there at Knoxville, and then she later married a Union soldier who was a school teacher there at Hebron. But sad thing about the Bradhams, a couple of the Bradhams do have marked graves, but old Mrs. Bradham is one of these unmarked graves in the Trilby Cemetery. We know which one it is, she just doesn't have a marker. These are numbered stones, and then there's several of the Bradham babies are buried there, and that was one of the things too that you see a lot of. You know, the babies, there were a lot of babies that were casualties during that time, newborns or maybe small children. But Rosa, the daughter, the Confederate orphan, the Yankee widow, found out her husband actually left her and went to Georgia, and he died there, and she actually got his Union pension after he died. But when she was getting it, she was in the Florida hospital at Chattahoochee, and she was there for several decades. And that's the sad thing. And I actually went and found her grave, and it's also an unmarked grave with a number on it. And I was pleased that the hospital staff at Chattahoochee would cooperate with me and help me find it. And they were very helpful. And I found that just last March, a year ago. And so I'd like to, I thought maybe we could even bring her back to Trilby, or probably the easiest thing to do will be to help the family get a marker for her grave there. This man changed Trilby a lot. Peter Demens, and I won't even try to say his name in Russian, but he was over in the Longwood area, even Oakland area, Sanford area, and he built a railroad starting at Lake Mellon and coming over to the west. And he didn't intend to go all the way to St. Petersburg, but he did. And so along the path of his railroad was the community of Macon. And that forevermore changed what we now know of as Trilby was the coming of the railroad. Peter Demens bringing that through. And here's a map of his railroad as it came over from Sanford west, eventually to St. Petersburg. And this is one of the trains. This was taken somewhere between Sanford and Trilby. The Sanford Historical Museum got me this, they helped me get this photo, and they don't know where exactly it is, but they said it was between Sanford and Trilby. But you can just see the rough wilderness that the trains were going through, and they didn't make great time, but it did help change the economy. This is actually a later item, but this is for the Union dues for the Orange Belt Division, a receipt. And then this building, this was on eBay a few years ago, and Richard helped me get this picture of it, and it's not a great scan, but he was able to do the best he could to doctor it up. And it's one of those things where I was going to go in and I was going to buy this on eBay. And I got in a little bit too late. I thought I could get in at the last minute and win it. And it was one of those things where I would have been more comfortable going home confessing to my wife I spent $500 for the picture than for the remorse I felt in not getting this picture. because on the back of the picture it tells who each one of these people are. And it tells that there was a hotel to the rear, to the left of this building. And Macon, the downtown area of Macon, was actually a little bit to the west along the Orange Belt route from what was downtown Trilby, a little bit west of where the depot that we all remember in Trilby. And it eventually moved over to where the depot was. But this picture, very valuable. Like I said, it really hurt me to lose this one, and I don't know where it went. I'd like to think it would surface again sometime. One of the interesting things in the Trilby Cemetery, the Daniel family is buried there, and they were one of the early families. And they used to have the really neat old gravestones, and at some point the family decided they needed to change them out for modern flat stones, and I've regretted that because the old stones said that each one of them being a consistent member of the Baptist Church at Macon, Florida. And this is a picture of the Baptist congregation, and I could probably zero in on the time a little better. This is not quite as old as that, but wood frame building. It was at least the first of three church buildings that the Baptist had at Trilby. And the Edwards family had this picture, and they were the ones that passed it along to me. But this is the congregation of the Baptist Church at Trilby, and it would have been the Baptist Church at Macon. And then we all know, we were talking a little bit earlier about the centennial, 1887 is when Pasco County was formed. And we broke away from Hernando County at the same time that Citrus County broke away at the northern part. We broke away at the southern part, or the Clabber end of the county. And, you know, it's always interesting to me, if you ever notice, Pasco County has that hump to the right. It's not, you know, you have a straight line and then there's a hump that goes up. And Colonel Henley, when he was writing his history of Pasco County, he told about why we have that hump there. It was because the organizers of the county wanted to have Macon in Pasco County because of the rail connections. That's why Pasco County has the hump. So, you know, Trilby was an important place. It was important enough that they wanted to make sure they had that rail intersection there. So if you ever wonder why Pasco County has its hump, that's because Colonel Henley and several others made sure that Pasco County included the area known as Trilby now. And then someone else that came along that changed Trilby was Henry B. Plant, and his north-south railroad that came through there and intersected with Peter DeMenz's Orange Belt Railroad. And that made Trilby very important as a rail intersection. In fact, any train that went to St. Petersburg, it went through Trilby. People would make that connection there. That helped the commerce at Trilby, restaurants and everything else of the rail passengers going south. But this is Henry B. Plant, and he had a key part in Trilby's success. But this person here had quite a bit to do with Trilby's success as well. And this is Mrs. Henry B. Plant, Margaret Plant. And this is conjecture, but one of the stories that's told is, you know, how did Trilby get its name? Well, there was a novel that had come out written by George de Moyer, and it was talking about the life in Paris and the young artist there. What do you call those folks? The young artist in Paris?
Bohemians.
Bohemians, thank you, the Bohemians. And this, it's a great book to read. And it's quite old, but if you can plow through it, it's really an enjoyable book. But Mrs. Henry B. Plant supposedly enjoyed the book so much that she convinced her husband to name the next town platted after the novel Trilby, which was a worldwide sensation. It was the kind of book that all the ladies were reading. And the Methodist ladies would have read it openly. The Baptist ladies would have read it in secret. It was a very interesting book. But you ought to read it sometime. And that helped me even understand the times of Trilby's formation even more, is reading that book. But Mrs. Henry B. Plant talking her husband into naming the town for the novel that was a worldwide sensation. And not too many people today remember the heroine of the story, Trilby, but they do remember the villain. I think everybody just about has heard of Svengali. And he hypnotized Trilby, and she couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, but he made her a world-class singing act, the capitals of Europe. And a very interesting story. Notice the spider web on the book. And I thought this is neat too, that the way Trilby was laid out was almost like a spider web where the railroads intersected there. And when Henry B. Plant platted the town, he named the streets after characters in the novel. So you have, the depot was built around, I keep pointing at this and thinking you're seeing Svengali Square was where the railroad tracks came together, intersected. And so you had Little Billy Street, and you had Sweet Alice, and you had Dillard, and all of these names from the book, Trilby, the novel. You can actually get a copy of this on the Property Appraiser website, the Trilby plat. And most of these streets never were built. They just exist mostly on a plat. So you don't have streets out in Trilby named for these characters, although I think that would have been neat. This is probably the earliest picture. Now, I showed you a picture of Macon, but this is an interesting picture of downtown Trilby that was in Leslie's Weekly, which was a newspaper that had been around for many years, even up until that time. But the little community made quite a sensation worldwide because they chose the name Trilby. And Trilby, the novel, was such a worldwide sensation that even Leslie's Weekly and other newspapers around the country were writing stories about this promising little town in central Florida called Trilby. And so this is a very interesting picture. It came from Leslie's Weekly, as well as this picture of the nearby Withlacoochee River. And it said, "This is the river near where Trilby lives," or something is what the caption says. Richard helped me get these scanned as well, and I appreciate that. Here's a postcard that was also on eBay, and this is a train that was parked at Trilby, right at the bend heading southwest towards St. Petersburg. To the left is where the pond would be, and over to the right you can see the old depot there that was built by Henry B. Plant, the picture of the depot that I showed you earlier, the two depots. This is that photo again, the freight depot on the left, the passenger station on the right. And this is also from a postcard.
But that right-left orientation is as you look at it. Theirs is the opposite.
No, I'm looking at it the same way y'all are looking at it.
Okay.
Yeah. The left is the freight depot. I know it looks, the one on the right is the passenger shed. Yeah. So, this is called a bird's eye view of Trilby, Florida, and I'll show you why it's a bird's eye view in a minute. I thought, how did they get a bird's eye view? But this building on the right was surely a rooming house, as large as it was. And you can actually, if you examine the picture closely, you'll see there are vineyards also. And then the buildings a little more to the left are the actual downtown Trilby buildings, and you can see the passenger depot to the far left, the shed there. But I think, how did they get a bird's eye view? Well, it's because they stood on top of the coal chute and got a bird's eye view, because it does kind of go downward from that point south. And the Methodist Church is to the right. When it was formerly located on the railroad bank, it was later moved a little further southeast to where it stands now. But this was the original coal chute at Trilby. This is a postcard as well. This is a postcard picture of downtown Trilby, and this is shot through that passenger shed. You can see the building right in the middle is it says post office. The Edwards store is on the right, and then the Bradham store, I think, is the very far right. There's a drugstore on the left. Just a very interesting picture, and I'll bring this picture back up and talk about it again here in just a little while as well. And then there was even a newspaper published at Trilby. Jeff Miller scanned this one for me. It was called the Pasco County News, and I photocopied this. They have this in the collection here at the Pioneer Florida Museum. Then there were several hotels there at Trilby. Now, these were not Hiltons or Hyatts, but they served not only the railroad passengers, but also the railroad employees. Because a lot of the employees were transient. They'd come and stay for a while, and then the railroad would send them further down the track. But with connections being made at Trilby, you did need a hotel. And this was the Roller Hotel, and several members of that family have come to our reunion. In fact, one will be here with us tomorrow. And this is another view of that same hotel, the Roller Hotel. That was Harvey Worthington's family, for those of you that remember Harvey Worthington. This was a restaurant, and this would be on the far left here. The restaurant is just to the south of the Roller Hotel. Then you have another hotel there in the middle, and then yet another hotel to the right that was called the Trilby House, Trilby Hotel. And this was one of the first pictures I collected. A lady came here to the Pioneer Museum trying to find out information about this building because her grandmother had been the innkeeper there for a short while. And so she helped me get a copy of this photo. And I was called down here to the Pioneer Museum on a Friday afternoon, and I was told by Margaret, Glenn's wife, that there would be a meeting of the Historical Society that night too, and that's how I started going to the Historical Society meetings. Here's a postcard I did successfully purchase on eBay, and this is a restaurant at Trilby. On the back it says, "At Trilby, Florida." And it's high up off the ground, which makes me think that it would be on the west side of the tracks where a lot of the stores were a little bit higher up off the ground because of the pond, the railroad pond that is there. So an interesting picture here. There is to the right an African-American lady sitting in a rocking chair, an African-American male or two standing next to her, and I have a feeling there was a restaurant owned by an African-American family, so it may have been their restaurant, or she may have been the one that kept the customers coming back, the good cook. This one doesn't come out too well, but this is Mrs. Roller and Mrs. Bird, Dr. Bird's wife and Mrs. Roller, in Dr. Bird's new car. And this is in front of the depot overhang, and you can also see the Trilby Hotel in the background through the overhang there. This is a bridge over the Withlacoochee River. This was a picture, a postcard that was given to me by the Evans family, the Cannon family, excuse me. And then this was the Cannon home place in Trilby. Itinerant photographers would go along and take pictures of people's houses. They'd dress up in their Sunday best and stand in front of the house. That picture of the Roller Hotel a little earlier, you saw pictures in the Trilby Hotel. You saw people standing on the balconies. And the Trilby State Bank was at Trilby, and these are some checks. They're somewhere here at the museum. I haven't been able to find them in recent years, but Low V. Thomas had donated these, and it shows a picture of the bank there in the middle, and it shows the network of railroad tracks that all intersected at Trilby. Very neat. This is a photocopy of that check. A photocopy that was made in the late 70s, so you can see that the quality was not as good then. I have the check that's on top in this picture. It's not in very good shape, but I'm glad to have that one. And then here is a picture of the Bradham family standing in front of the bank. I thought this was interesting. And then this is a picture of the interior of the bank. Lester Crum was the cashier, and his wife was actually locked in the vault during a robbery of the bank, and she told the story. It was very interesting. There's another picture over in Newport Richey, the attorney Williams that's on the lake there. He has it in his office, and I'm trying to get a copy of it, but his grandfather, maybe it's his grandfather, I think, was an attorney in Trilby on the second floor of the Trilby State Bank, and there's a picture of him in his office there on the second floor of the Trilby State Bank, and it's in that law office. This is the vault. It's no longer there, but after the bank went bankrupt and was torn down, the vault was there for a long time. I used to enjoy going in there looking for gold when I was a kid, but the bank had gone bankrupt, but I didn't know that. And this is William Friedman. He came to Trilby. He was originally from Romania, and he came to Trilby. He had been in Brooksville before he came to Trilby, and he was the merchant prince of Trilby. He had a department store in downtown Trilby, and I'll go ahead and show you that. And he advertised. He was quite a salesman, and his wife died while he was at Trilby. William Friedman was Jewish. I looked all over thinking his wife was buried somewhere here, but being Jewish, she was buried in a Jewish cemetery in Tampa, and I did locate her grave. There is a photo of her on the grave, but through the years the photo has been damaged to the extent that you cannot get a good sense of what she looked like. But I did leave a rock on her grave. That's a Jewish tradition as well. And I have located grandchildren in the Atlanta area, and they've actually shared some information with me as well. But William Friedman did not stay in Trilby very long. He was very successful, but he moved on to Dade City, and what's now the Larkin building was the building that he built as the Friedman Mercantile, and he later became the mayor of Dade City, and he was also one of the charter members of the Kiwanis Club. So it just makes you proud of how inclusive we were in Trilby and Dade City back then. I thought that was a neat thing. This is the Florida Sanatorium that was at Trilby. This was a TB, tuberculosis sanatorium. Dr. Harvey Bird and Dr. William Devon built this, and it did not last very long. It burned down. But a beautiful building out west of Trilby, near where we usually have our homecoming picnic each year. And then this was this is the lake that's near there, and this is from a postcard. But you would think that the sanatorium would scare everybody away, but it was quite a focal point, quite a social center for the community. They had Thanksgiving dinner there for the community, so I guess people were not too worried about how catching tuberculosis was. This was Dr. Bird's home. It's since been demolished, but he had one of the finer homes in Trilby during that time. Later, the Hancock family would live here. Some of you know the Hancocks would remember Martha Jewell Atkinson. This is the house where she grew up. Then the Trilby School. This is very similar to the school at Elford. In fact, I have a floor plan of this school that the late Angus Knott drew for me. And I want to take that floor plan over to Elford's and see how much it compares. But there's a lot of similarity in this building and the one at Elford's. They were built about the same time, so probably a very similar floor plan. This is a picture of one of the classes at the old Trilby School. And it was called Trilby High School, although it only went to the 8th grade. You had to go to Dade City if you wanted to go beyond the 8th grade. There was a family called Valentine. Henry Valentine was from South Carolina. He had been a young Confederate soldier in South Carolina as a boy. He tried to get his pension, Confederate pension here in Florida, but they couldn't find records for him because he was just a boy, so he couldn't get his pension. He tried and he tried and he tried, and finally an act of the legislature specifically for Henry Valentine got him his pension, and his wife continued to receive that pension as a Confederate widow after he died, and she lived up until the 50s. But this was his blacksmith shop at Trilby, and there's still a building there on this site. I don't know how much of it is originally his blacksmith shop, and this was the interior of Henry Valentine's blacksmith shop. And some of his granddaughters were hoping to be here tomorrow, and they emailed me today and said they could not be here. But there are several of them. I'll talk about that in a minute. This is the Valentine House where the Valentine family lived. And this is what it looked like about the time it was demolished in the late 70s. I took this picture myself knowing that this was a historic house, and I'm glad I did, even with the quality of it. These are the Valentine children, and one of them, Alice Greiner, she is the second from the right seated. I knew her. I interviewed her when I was in high school on tape, and I have that transcript still. But a nice-looking family there. You see the son that's standing there. His name, he went by the nickname of Hop, and that's his sister there next to him. Her hair is behind her, but that's his sister, one of the sisters. He was the only boy in the group that lived, and he was killed in a car accident delivering Tampa Tribune, a truck delivering Tampa Tribunes in Tampa in the 1920s, and he's buried somewhere in the Trilby Cemetery, an unmarked grave. The other Valentine members, their graves are marked, but a tragic story there with the Valentines and the loss of Hop. And this is the road, my last hurrah. I'll be taking down this road on my way to the Trilby Cemetery someday. And some people that I've gotten to know quite intimately that have been dead for years in the Trilby Cemetery. And this is, my father's buried there. He was the first of our family. The rest of my family is buried at Linden over in Sumter County. But my dad was the first of our family to be buried there. So one of the things I do for my dad is I go every Saturday and take my little boy too, and we clean up around there. So never-ending job, but a neat place. Here's a gravestone for two sons, the Weeks family. The Weeks were some of the early settlers, and they're not the Weeks that we know of in this area. In fact, these Weeks went on down to Tampa, and in fact, they own the land where the Tampa Theater stands. They don't own the theater building, but they own the land that it sits on. The city of Tampa leases it from them. But these two boys, I want to find out the story on them because they both died on the same day, and I'm guessing it was some type of epidemic or something, but they were different ages, and they both died on the same day, and they share a gravestone, James and Eddie Weeks. And I've contacted the members of the Weeks family that are in Tampa, and we're trying to find, the Tampa Tribune doesn't go back that far, and I'm hoping maybe the Times-Union in Jacksonville may have something, because it's amazing how much of our local news was in the Times-Union in Jacksonville. These babies, these are two babies that are buried side by side. They did not live at the same time, but the parents built, I'm not sure if they're buried above ground or if this is just built over their graves. I've been pleased through the years that this has not been vandalized. But the family name was Butts. They lived at Trilby. He was a conductor for the railroad, captain, and the babies lived at different times, but both babies died. The second one they took to Birmingham trying to save her, and but she died. They brought her back to Dade, to Trilby, and buried her. And I found a daughter that was born in Trilby. Well, she had already died, but I found her descendants, and she's buried down in Englewood. But I found the mother buried in Tallahassee, Mrs. Butts, and I found Captain Butts buried in Jacksonville. And I was able to find in the Times-Union when he died, and I found out that he committed suicide. He shot himself in the head. Just a sad life. You can imagine losing two children like this. This is the Edwards family. This is when Walter Edwards died, and this was taken at the time. I thought this was an interesting picture from the funeral of Walter Edwards. This is the Cox Family Enclosure. I had heard that there was a Confederate soldier named Cox buried in the Trilby Cemetery, but I didn't know where he was buried. And there's only one marked grave within this enclosure. Her name was Ola Calhoun, and I found out that she was the Cox daughter, Robert Cox's daughter. Here comes the train. And so the other unmarked grave that has a little marker with no name, that I'm thinking that's probably R.V. Cox, the Confederate soldier. Here's another grave that I just recently helped mark. I have a plat of the cemetery, and if you notice, there's that little marker just to the top of the gravestone there, and it said that number corresponded to my plat, said there was a Douglas baby buried there. Well, there was a Douglas family at Trilby, but they're all buried out at Clay Sink, and they had babies that they took out to Clay Sink to bury, so I knew this wasn't their baby. But I did find a death certificate for this baby, and found out the name of the parents. And I found that they were buried in the frost-proof area. And I called down and found a family member, and they said, well, we're going to be having a family reunion in Lakeland in 2 weeks. So I went down and crashed their family reunion. And I showed them the death certificate, I showed them the plat, and one of the older nieces remembered the baby dying, and that the baby was buried there at the Trilby Cemetery. So we solved that mystery. We were able to mark the stone, and the family members came over after we got the grave marked. And this is the sister and the niece being the older one on the left there, and she actually remembered it, the baby being buried out there. So that was a neat family connection I was able to make. This was one of the boarding houses at Trilby, and it's still standing. This is what we called the Bradshaw House. This is what it looks like now. It's not going to be around too much longer, I'm afraid, but it fronts what was the railroad bank. So if you're going down the trail sometime to the north of Trilby on the west side of the tracks, you'll see this house. And it was also, not only the Bradshaw family lived there, but it was also, they operated a boarding house, which was not unusual. Also, the Bankston family, the Trunnell family, Mrs. Trunnell had been a Bankston, they operated a boarding house in their home as well. And this home is still standing, and the Zorro family has lived there more recently. This house was Mrs. Tyer's house. She also took in boarders there at Trilby, mostly railroad employees. And then we have in Trilby what's called the Trilby Country Cemetery. Coleman and Ferguson Funeral Home called it the Trilby Colored Cemetery. We were even in death, we were not integrated. We were segregated even in death. And every once in a while there will still be a funeral out here at the Trilby Country Cemetery. And it's not in the best of condition, but it's a very interesting place to walk around. I enjoyed surveying this cemetery. The Green family is buried there, and the Greens came to this area with the Michlers and the O'Berrys. They were their servants. After slavery ended, they stayed with the family and they came to this area. So the Green family was part of the Michler and O'Berry families, and the Clarence Green on the right there in the census records, it describes him as mulatto, which was always interesting to me because the Green family was definitely a black family, African American family. And I recently met a great-granddaughter, and she had been curious about that as well. She went in and had DNA testing done, which Ancestry.com will do, and she found the family, which was a very prominent family, in Brooksville. She made contact with that family. I helped her make contact with the family, and they were very open about this. It was about like Thomas Jefferson kind of stories. So a very interesting story there, and about the Green family. And I helped her go out and find Clarence Green's grave there in the Trilby Country Cemetery. They came a couple of years to our Trilby homecoming. This is the Speights family in Trilby, which was also a very prominent African American family, and several of them are still around, but some are in St. Petersburg, some are in New York City now. And it's been interesting to make contact with the family in New York City, and they provided me with this photo. And I showed you this picture a little earlier, and you can see downtown Trilby, they were all wood frame buildings. So you can imagine what happened in May of 1925 when one of the buildings caught on fire. The Bradham store caught on fire upstairs. A tenant was living up there. The whole town went up like dominoes there on the west side of the tracks. Here is an article. In fact, I found newspaper articles all over Florida newspapers about the fire at Trilby. It was quite an event when the whole town on the west side of the tracks went up in flames. After the fire, a lot of the stores were rebuilt, but not in what had been downtown Trilby. They got away from the railroad and went to the hard road. By that point, paved roads had come to Trilby. And what we call Old Trilby Road, they called the Dixie Highway then. If you can imagine, that was the forerunner to US Highway 301, was what we now call Old Trilby Road. And this store was the Edwards store. They had been in downtown Trilby, but they rebuilt on what was called Oak Street, what we call 575 now, the intersection of what's now called Beaver Road and 575. And that's young Bert Edwards behind the counter. I don't know if any of you knew Bert. He's been gone several years. This building fronts... Bert and Ethel. That was Bert as a boy. This building has been more of a residence. It fronts on Old Trilby Road, what was the Dixie Highway then, the forerunner to Highway 301. And it was a store and also post office after downtown Trilby burned. And downtown Trilby, we think of it more what is along 575 and Old Trilby Road now, not where it would have been along the dirt road where the depot was, just a little bit to the southwest of this, where we see these buildings today. After the fire in Trilby, the passenger shed was torn down and a more modern depot was completed in 1927. The freight depot that was to the right, it was a two-story building, if you remember from that earlier photo. It was cut down to a one-story building, and it was a little further to the northeast of this building. The other two buildings had been side by side. The new depot was actually a little bit to the southwest of just south of where the passenger shed had been. And it was both, it was just for passengers. The other building was for freight. Most depots that you see were both freight and passenger. But in Trilby we had two depots, one for freight, one for passengers. This is the coal chute, the new coal chute. I showed you the old one where the bird's eye view was taken. This was the new one. And my dad remembers when this was torn down. They had to do it with dynamite, and it took several blasts. In fact, the building, the coal chute was only standing on one leg before it finally had its swan song. And he remembered when that happened. Here is a train heading south through Trilby. This would have been going toward Lakeland. You see the coal chute in the background there to the left. The water tower, a lot of people will remember the water tower. I remember when it was torn down. And then the scale building there, I've always thought that would have been a neat little building to have kept. That was a scale there. You can see to the right of that little building where the train would roll over it and it could be weighed there. And the scales there was actually a basement in that little building that went up under the tracks for all of the mechanism of the scales. And I wish my mother wasn't here tonight, because I'd tell you I went down and explored a little bit, but I'd get in trouble even today if I told you I did that with Randy, my cousin. So that's what got me in trouble.
That was building that was on the east side of the track?
That would have been on the east side of the tracks, that's correct. North of what's now 575.
So is that the building that my husband, who was going to Pasco High in 67, said that Granny Goodwitch operated out of that. She would sell beer to minors.
Oh, that was a little to the south of that. Yeah, I don't have a picture of the caboose, but yeah, that was the name of and it had some other names too, but the caboose was the name when I came along. I think it was Wondering is what it was called, and then it burned and they rebuilt it and they named it Still Wondering. And but I knew it as the caboose. But yes, it's quite a hopping place. I can tell you some stories, but this was the section foreman house. This is where my father was born in 1941. My grandfather was section foreman at Trilby. They moved him up and down the tracks, east, west, north, south, but he always came back to Trilby. He started his career in Trilby about 1917. My Aunt Marie, the oldest of the children, was born at Trilby, and my dad, the youngest, was born there in 1941 in this house, which still stands today. It's been moved a little further west from where it had been, though. It was right across from the depot when it stood. This hotel was built after the Trilby fire. This was also called Trilby Hotel, and it was made into apartments several years ago. Not in that great a shape anymore, but still a very interesting building from that period of time when towns had hotels, and it's still there today. This was the second of the buildings, at least the second of the buildings that housed the Baptist Church. And this was across the street from where I grew up in Trilby. I never saw this building. The new building had taken its place by then, but the foundation was still out there. This was the interior of that building. Earl Tyre told me a funny story that as a boy there was like ballast lighting that had been put up in later years, and they had just sung "Love Lifted Me." And one of the lines in that song says, "Souls in danger, look above, Jesus completely saves." And right after they sang that song, the ballast fell down, and thankfully nobody was injured, but souls in danger, look above. I took this picture before I came tonight. This is a picture with my camera. This is the Trilby High School basketball team, and I really like this picture. In fact, two of the men died just in the last year and a half, the last two of them. The man, the second from the right, he is Angus Buddy Knott. He went to Live Oak from here, and he was actually mayor of Live Oak. We grew up across the street from each other, just several decades apart, and we were both mayors at the same time. It was kind of neat when we made that connection. His sister was Vivian Boyko, for those that remember the Boyko family. But one of the other survivors, he told me at a Lakuchi reunion that this picture had poverty written all over it. But that's a happy-looking bunch of boys. This was in 1932, so if they were poor, they were happy. I know I'm running out of time. This is Kenneth Dennis. Very interesting story here, a very sad story. This picture was taken at his graduation from the Trilby School, and he died a month later. His uncle shot him, thinking that he was shooting the boy's father. They were brothers-in-law, and they had a feud between them. And the son was actually the one that was shot. The uncle committed suicide before the day was out. There was a posse out to find him. He hanged himself in the cell in Dade City, and the funeral was held the same day. Both funerals were held in Trilby. Both burials were held up in North Florida, the same cemetery, but at different times of the day. Glenn Whittington told me that one of the funerals was better attended than the other. Just a real sad story. And then this is one of the times when the Trilby School had burned and the students were meeting in the Methodist Church. Some of the students were in the Methodist Church, some were in the Masonic Lodge. Yeah. Some of them did not want their pictures taken. Yeah, my uncle George is in this picture, as is my Uncle Walt. An interesting picture, and that was handed down to me by the Merritt family. This is the Trilby School. It still stands. This is the final Trilby School. This is what it looks like today. This is where my father went through school. It closed before I was in school. So I went to school in Lakuchi. This is a silo out west of Trilby. There was a dairy there, the Hood Dairy. The Hood family out of St. Petersburg operated this dairy among several other families. But the Hoods actually lived, part of the Hood family lived in Trilby during that time. This is what was the Masonic Hall. It was demolished in the last few years. Wilton tore it down. It was about to fall down over itself. But it was quite a meeting place for the people in Trilby. It was also used, I mentioned, as a school, also as a store at times. The lower portion after the Trilby fire, some merchants opened up shop in the lower portion. And in fact, Madonna got me this picture. She found this out at the fairgrounds. This is the Home Demonstration Club, and they met in the lower floor of the Masonic Lodge there in Trilby, and this is a group picture which I thought was really neat. This is in her Dade City book as well. But the ladies all banded together, and over the course of a few years with some fundraisers, they were able to build their own building, which still stands today. This had been the polling place. We had our 4-H clubs there when I was a kid, the Home Demonstration Club, all part of the Extension Service, University of Florida. And but they had a silver T when they dedicated this building. So these ladies were quite refined that were members of the Trilby Home Demonstration Club, having a silver T. We don't do that in Trilby much anymore. Then the diesel trains began to come into Trilby, replacing the coal, the trains, the steam engines. And this is a picture of the train as it's heading north from St. Petersburg, stopped in Trilby. So even after the town burned, Trilby was quite an important center on the railroad even then. You see on the left a baggage cart there. If you're ever passing George and Gladys's and you see that covered wagon, that's an old baggage cart. My dad had carried a gash on his forehead from playing around. He grew up around the depot. The tongue of the baggage cart hit him on the forehead as a young boy, and he carried that scar with him throughout his life. This is Mrs. McGuire. She operated the restaurant in the Trilby Depot. This is where the toy trains are now. That was the restaurant. And I just recently got this picture. Her granddaughter posted it on Facebook for me. Listen to the train. Sweet sounds. Sweet sounds. And so this was the depot counter. This is what it looks like today. You see the little pass-through holes on the right and on the left. And Mrs. McGuire standing in front of, there would have been a counter out there in front of that doorway. And they've recreated her kitchen back there here at the museum today. And here's a more recent picture. You see all the number of tracks there. Trilby was quite an important rail yard as well as being an intersection. And we're getting toward the end. These are some more recent photos of the Trilby Depot before it was moved here to the Pioneer Florida Museum. And I remember when it was moved too. I took some pictures of it while it was being moved, but some pictures of how I remember it. We had a pasture right across from the depot behind where the section foreman house would have been where my dad was born. And so when we would plow the pasture for gardening, bottles would come up. We'd find all sorts of treasures from the old town site of Trilby. So I felt like when I was growing up that I was growing up on the site of ancient Babylon, because we were always finding neat treasures every time we'd plow, or when the pond would come up and then it would recede, things would surface. And neat memories from my childhood. And the depot was still an active depot then, although not for passengers, just but they had a station agent there, Ray Thomas. And then it was closed in about 1976, early 76, and brought here to the Pioneer Florida Museum. Now here are some pictures, the last three or four frames, are Trilby homecoming. This is usually out at the Tomco property, which is near where the sanatorium, the TB sanatorium stood. It was on the highest hill in the area, and it's a beautiful view out there. We won't be having it there tomorrow. We'll be having it here. Join us here tomorrow if you'd like to come. Just bring a covered dish. That's the price of admission, is a covered dish. We'd love to have you. We'll start arriving around 10 o'clock with dinner at noon. And here's a group of men looking at pictures, and I always bring these pictures with me, and it kind of bothered me a little bit when I looked at this picture and realized that 3 of the gentlemen here have already passed away. So I realized I'm going to have quite a challenge keeping this Trilby homecoming going in future years. So we're going to move on to the next generation. This is, we know how to cook, we don't go hungry. Come tomorrow and you can partake in this as well. And some of the best cooking that you'll find anywhere around. So this is the story of my hometown and the impact it's had on me through the years. And I've enjoyed collecting this information about this great Babylon that in a few years no one will have any information at all. So I have to make sure that those of us that are interested in this, that we keep it preserved for the next few generations, this place that we call Trilby. And the people that I've come to meet, even though many of them were long gone before I even came along. It's been interesting researching the history of our community and having this homecoming of old families. Thank you very much, everybody.